All right, we're good, Amy. Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Aimee Mitchell. I've been a species at risk biologist, self-employed for about over 10 years on the coast. I was a biologist with the Ministry of Environment for a couple of years as well in 2008 and 2009. So I got to spend some time in the Seashelt area and also up in Bella Coola. So that's where I got started in BC. My first job actually as an intern was on burrowing owls in Washington State. That was my first work with endangered species, but that's what I've always wanted to work with, species at risk. So I am now representing the Coastal Partners in Conservation, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about just an overview of a bunch of our different projects that we work on species at risk on the South Coast. And it was already, we already read through this, basically, just like our main focus is to use science-based information to lead our actions to protect, restore, and monitor species. And we collaborate a lot with all different kinds of people, biologists and governments and First Nations and businesses and landowners, because we really feel like that has the best likelihood of having like long-term effects on species population and keeping track of all these little creatures as well, because there's only so many of us on our team, and it's very valuable to have lots of extra eyes and boots on the ground. So we really try to engage citizens and locals in our work as much as possible also. So there it is, promoting science-based conservation through research and education. So the society was established in 2018. So we had already been running a bunch of our projects, sort of like here and there, with different collaborators and different funders. And we had a tough time kind of explaining who we were, because we were so kind of all over the place, and different projects had different connections, as I was saying. So it's really nice that we have this society now, and it's provides an umbrella for all of our projects. Again, and our focus is monitoring and restoring species at risk populations and habitat, and partnerships and outreach are huge. And we also try to fill in the gaps of things that other groups or the government aren't really working on, or some other species that maybe aren't quite as sexy and don't get us quite as much attention as some of the bigger like megafauna and fish. So yeah, we try to focus on the lesser known species a little bit. So, and here's our team. So we're a group of biologists. Some of us have different specializations, herpetologists, botanists. I'm a general species at risk biologist, so I really enjoy working on a bunch of different taxa. So I've done a lot of raptor work, a lot of turtles and reptiles and amphibians. So yeah, I've done owls and goshawks, burrowing owls, as I mentioned, and done some screech owls work as well. Talk about that a little bit. And then we also have like habitat restoration specialists on our team too, that help with a lot of that work that we do for species. Our program focus, as you can see, is species at risk. They can be federally or provincially listed species at risk. And like I said, it's often species that maybe so far, I mean, a lot of these species that are just starting to come up, and there's more and more research going on and more partners and collaborations going on, which is great. But when we started about 10 years ago, a lot of these species had very little research done on them yet. So this going from the top left, over and down, we got the western painted turtle. That's our only native freshwater turtle in British Columbia. It's has a coastal population and an interior population, and our coastal population was designated endangered in 2016, and actually through some of our efforts and our surveys, etc., it's actually been downlisted to threatened, so that's good. And then we have rigid apple moss. Not much is known about that. I'm not a botanist either, so I can't tell you a lot about that one either. And this is the western screech owl, and we have little brown myotis, little brown bat, and red-legged frogs, western toads, and northern goshawks, and Oregon forest snails. And our program focus area is the South Coast, so Fraser Valley, Lower Mainland, the Sunshine Coast. There's a group that works on the Lower Sunshine Coast that we partnered with quite a bit, the Sunshine Coast Wildlife Project, and actually I did work for them for a bit shortly after I was finished working for the province. So actually they got me started on western painted turtles they were working on, and amphibians. So we still collaborate with them quite a bit and fill in any gaps and help where we can. But we sort of also took up the upper Sunshine Coast area, like Powell River and Texada Island, because nobody else was really doing any work there. And in particular on Texada, there's turtle populations there that are, at least one of them is doing quite well. And it's nice to have areas that aren't quite so urban as well. So it's been nice to do some work for all those species up in that area. So in 2022, these are our programs. Many of them have been going on for many years. Like I said, the Western Painted Turtle Project started about 2008. And just turtle population, nest, and restored habitat monitoring and maintenance is what we focus on. We also have a Allen Lake Western Toad Road Mortality Mitigation project we've been working on for several years. We do a lot of bat roost and colony monitoring and community outreach for bats. We participated in the Western Screech Owl nest box monitoring program. There's other groups, including the Fraser Valley Conservancy in the province and groups on the island as well, who do a lot of this work. And so we're part of that program. And we just focus on nest boxes that we've installed in particular areas, but we share those data with others, with the working group. Oregon forest snail, some of the invertebrate stuff, Oregon forest snails and western bumblebees we've done a bit of work on also. And a little more recently, we've been focusing on at-risk birds of prey conservation on the South Coast. And that has also been largely in partnership with the Sunshine Coast Wildlife Project, who really started that project a few years ago too. And then outreach and education is essential for all of the work that we do, just to let people know about some of these lesser known species and what's going on and what the threats are and what people can do about them. And as I mentioned, like just having more eyes and around looking for these species, and letting us know if there's something like a turtle that's about to cross the road, any of these kinds of threats that we can respond to in like real time is great, rather than just like getting the observation weeks or months later. So we try to keep up on that. So for the Western Painted Turtle, began in 2008 with region-wide surveys to assess turtle populations. And at that time, very little was known about Western Painted Turtles on the coast. There were some sightings, but we knew virtually nothing about the populations and what the demography was, like what the sex ratio was, what survival was like, how nesting success, all of those things that are essential to really try to assess the population and then figure out what needs to be done in order to successfully recover that population. So we started with monitoring nesting females and protecting nests, because that's one of the very first very important features is making sure that the turtles have a place that they can nest and successfully have young hatch and survive and get recruited into the population. Because often what people see a bunch of turtles at a site and they say, oh, this population is doing great. There's so many turtles around. I see them all over the place. But in fact, if you don't really know if there's juvenile turtles around, you could just be basically looking at a living dead population, like just all these older turtles who can live 50 to 60 years. And if there's no young turtles coming up into the population, then eventually they're just going to all die out, which is what has happened at many of the sites already, but that we discovered from the surveys. And so the next thing was installing, maintaining, and effectiveness monitoring of the nesting and basking habitat. Those are critical habitat features for turtles. They need somewhere, as I mentioned, somewhere safe to nest so that they're recruiting juveniles into the population, and they need ample basking habitat, as that's critical for it's critical for the females to build up energy before they're about to nest, and also it's essential for that digestion and for their immune systems. So if they don't have places they can bask safely, especially the females, as I said, just before they're about to nest, then it can eventually really degrade their health and the overall population if they don't have those features. So, and studying the nesting and hatching success, especially at these nesting beaches, these artificial beaches that we have installed, or nesting areas that we have enhanced. We just want to make sure that we're not actually doing more harm than good, and that they're successful nesting in those areas that we create for them. So from the region-wide surveys, it indicated that majority of the occupied sites had less than 5 adults remaining. And a lot of them only had 1 or maybe 2, and often it was the same sex. So you only had like a couple females or maybe a couple males. So obviously that is not a good recipe for recovering a population. And a lot of this is due to just lack of suitable nesting habitat. You know, people like beaches and people take those spots over, and then they get trampled, and dogs dig up nests, and they get predated by other urbanized, you know, subsidized predators like raccoons and coyotes and things like that. And also poaching, unfortunately, has been and continues to still be an issue for the Western painted turtle. It's a little strange to me. Sometimes it seems that people don't really think of a Western painted turtle as actually a wild animal. And I guess it's also derived from the fact that so many people have had pet turtles. So they think, oh, I'll just take this turtle and stick him in my pond and everything will be fine. But often that turtle will try to make it back to its lake or pond and get killed in the process. And also you've removed that individual from the population. So now they're not contributing any genetics or producing any young. So it basically just reduces the reproductive potential of that population. So that's something we still sort of deal with now. We occasionally get reports that people have still poached turtles. So that's also part of our education program. We try to get out there as well in regards to poaching. And again, that's where having citizen scientists around and just like locals keeping an eye out is also excellent for protecting populations. And so it was determined from this, because there was so many sites with just not very many turtles at all. It didn't matter how much threat mitigation and habitat restoration we did, many of these populations were not going to come back without a little bit of a boost. And that comes in the form of head starting, where either eggs or hatchlings are collected and they're raised up over a year. And they basically end up being 6 times the size as they would be from when they normally would hatch. So in this picture on the left at the top of that baby turtle, It's probably about the size of a loony when they first hatch. And then, so normally they would come out and they would go into the water at that size. And that first year of life is when they have the highest mortality rate. So, and then the picture on the right shows a head started turtle who is about 6 times the size. So they're about 5 grams normally when they hatch and go into the water. And then they're about, our goal is about 30 grams usually to release them. And that just, significantly increases their survival. So we needed to do that just to boost some of these populations where it was just, they were so critically low that they wouldn't be able to recover on their own without that boost. So there's been over 1,500 Head Start turtles have been released at 20 sites since 2013. And that's been the Ministry of whatever it's called right now, Land, Water, and Resource Stewardship now, I think is their new title. They have a facility as well in North Vancouver, and also Wildlife Preservation Canada is another partner. And they have facilities at the Greater Vancouver Zoo where they raise these Head Starts for release. So augmented sites have had increased population size from less than those 5 turtles per site to 30 to 100 turtles. There are some sites that it's even more than that if it's like quite an extensive site. So for example, something like Pitt Addington Marsh has turtles, and that site is quite extensive. So more than 100 turtles are going to be released at that site. So in addition to the nesting monitoring that we do, and in order to try to engage the public more in our work too, and just as I said, again, just having more people keeping their eye out for the turtles and reporting them to us helps us out a lot to respond in real time. You know, we can't be at 20 different sites at once. And a lot of times this nesting or anything that can happen where a turtle comes on land could happen anytime within a 2-month period. So it's really hard to say. You know, sometimes we can plan to be at a site, but maybe we won't see any turtles that day, but then the turtles will come up the next day when we're not there. So it's great to have people reporting that to us. We had a pilot program where we installed these signs for sightings and had people either text or email or share on Instagram. And actually, this is an older sign, and we have a newer sign that has Facebook Messenger on it as well. So actually, we got most of our sightings, and it seemed to be most effective on Facebook Messenger. So that was great. People sending us lots of photos. All these photos on the bottom were provided to us by citizen scientists. We had some, amazing photos that I've never been able to get for myself. I'm always so busy and like juggling equipment and other things that, I rarely get a chance to take good photos. So it's been great. In 2021, we had more than 300 sightings. I mean, often it's the same turtles again, but it's great that we've had that many reports. And then it increased to 500 in 2022 because we expanded the sites that we had the signage at. And actually it worked out because of COVID. So many more people were visiting the parks and these sites. And it was a great way remotely for citizens to get engaged and share information. But then we didn't have to worry about, getting each other sick or being too close or in an enclosed space or whatever. So it worked out really well that way. We had 61 nests recorded across the Lower Mainland sites in 2021, and actually in 2022, it was another 10 or so more. So I think it was, about 72. And we had our first nesting recorded at 2 recently installed nesting beaches in 2021. And then last year actually also was the very first year that we had Head Starts from previous years observed nesting. So the Head Starts are released. They're technically only a year old, but they're actually the size of around a 2-year-old by the time they get released, because instead of being dormant all winter, they're eating and growing and getting to be that big. And so they're released at that size, and then females mature between 8 and 10 years old, and males mature between 4 to 5 years old. So these turtles, these female turtles, came up right on schedule when they were about, the size of an 8-year-old, 8 to 9-year-old turtle, and they came up and started nesting last year. So that was very exciting. Because we did also really try, we do population monitoring where we catch the turtles, we take photos, and we have photo catalogs of all the turtles. Their plastrons represent like a thumbprint, so basically an individual picture for them, and they carry that ID with them their whole life. Sometimes it changes a little bit from when they're a hatchling to when they're an adult, but the base pattern stays the same, and so you can identify that same turtle year after year based on their photo. The head starts also do get a little pit tag before they're released, so we also do scan the turtles, and we'll know how old that turtle was, where it came from, and when and where it was released. But we have had a problem with catching younger turtles. They don't come up to bask as much as the adults. They're smaller, they don't require as much basking time. And again, it's often the females too who really need to bask for extended periods of time. So we don't really start to see them basking very much, and they're just harder to catch. So we couldn't really assess, we had a tough time assessing the survival of the head starts for a while. So now that they're starting to come up to nest, that's providing some excellent information, data for us that they're surviving and they're coming up and they're successfully nesting. So that is all what we want to see for the recovery and long-term success. So again, as with all our projects, the Painted Turtle Project partners with Wildlife Preservation Canada and the zoo and the ministry. The Farge Canada supports some of our restoration work. Fraser Valley Regional District, Metro Vancouver Parks has been a very important partner, because at the time that we did surveys, we also did habitat assessments, and we ranked habitat and threat assessments, and we ranked all the sites based on all those kind of features, like what kind of threats there are, how protected it is, what's the habitat like. And Metro Vancouver Parks had 6 of the 10 highest ranked sites for recovery. So they've been an amazing partner for us. And then a bunch of park associations we work with, and municipalities and First Nations. So it's been a great project to engage a bunch of different groups. And we have an extensive outreach program, again, providing training for turtle monitoring. We operate stewardship booths, and we conduct talks to schools and community groups and naturalist groups. So then we have our Allen Lake Western Toad Road mortality mitigation project. So monitoring began in 2016 when we incidentally observed adults crossing Sylvester Road when we were doing work for other species at the time. It was actually screech owls, I think we were doing surveys for at the time. And after that, we started monitoring that population, and we identified some important mortality hotspots for the adults and for the toadlets. So we've been working to try to mitigate that mortality for several years now. In 2022, we had 38 volunteers help move toads across the road on 20 nights of monitoring for the adults, which just happens in spring. So like late February, March, and then it goes into April. And the adults have to make 2 trips, one to cross the road to breed, to lay the egg strings, and then they have to come back as well. So they only go to the lake or the pond to lay their egg strings, and then they exit, and they spend the majority of their life in terrestrially. So I think that's something that people forget about, especially for toads, and also it's relevant for red-legged frogs, as they're both highly terrestrial. So the pond or the lake is just one part of their habitat. And if we're not mitigating or trying to protect the rest of their life cycle, then that can be a really big problem for maintaining the population or stopping declines. So in this year, it moved 1,632 individuals from March to May. So again, like I said, these are adults, but also these are the adults, but also it's likely them more than once, like on the return trip as well. So they have to go to the lake and they have to come back again as well. And the highest number was 519 on March 27th this year, on just one night. And what we have found, if there's no intervention and we're not there to help toads across the road, about 50% of them will get killed by vehicles. So that's been the best way that we can help mitigate the mortality at this point. But we are looking for longer term solutions to that as well. And 2022 right, was a big number. And what we found, often Western toad females only breed every second year. So it seems at this particular site that even years are the big years. So last year wasn't quite so big, and this year is a big year, and 2020 was a big year as well. So we've been working with MOT, Fraser Valley Regional District, the local community group, the Hatzic Valley Community Association, to try to get some toad-friendly culverts installed in this area. Modeling off the Ryder Lake program by the Fraser Valley Conservancy. They've helped advise us quite a bit, and they did do some of the toadlet monitoring earlier on as well. They were able to lend some of their students or interns to do some of that monitoring, so that was great to help us identify those hot spots. So once we found the hot spots, we have installed directional fencing to try to get them from crossing the road. In this photo, you can see that it's directional fencing, and it leads to, this is a bridge, and there's a creek there. It's a dry creek bed at the time that the toadlets are moving, which is in the summer, June, July, sometimes even August, just to keep them off the road. And that we've done that for 3 years in a row now, and it's been pretty successful at keeping the majority of toadlets off the road. But the working on the actual culverts has been quite challenging, because obviously we need the help and coordination of MOT and Fraser Valley Regional District, and there's a lot of issues of underfunding and like projects just not getting done when culverts need to be replaced, and we've been just really trying to keep up on them. And so when they are actually doing works, that we can try, like we could pay for the culvert, but we need to coordinate actually ripping up the road and things like that. So that's still a work in progress. We were able to work with the MOT, or at least their contractors, to install a little bit better of a culvert than the one that you see there at that location this year. So we'll see how it works next year. Then we do bat roost and colony monitoring. That's a partnership largely with the BC Community Bat Program. BC bat counts are conducted annually at 18 roosts just in the Fraser Valley. And our funding gives a little extra flexibility, and we kind of make up for some of the outreach and responding to bat calls as well, because the BC Community Bat Program has a limited amount of funding, and they have to spread it out through the entire province. So there's a bunch of different regional coordinators. I'm the regional coordinator for the Fraser Valley, and I also, again, take up the Texada and the Powell River area because nobody else is doing work in that area. But yeah, they have to split those limited funds amongst many regional coordinators throughout the entire province. So there often ends up being not a lot per coordinator to do that work. We also, myself and Chris Curry of Coastal Partners, work with the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada project on bats. focused on white nose syndrome research and investigating the use of a probiotic to try to help them fight the fungus. The fungus was detected in Washington State in 2016, and so we are expecting that it's already here and maybe not been detected, or it's coming anytime soon. And it's killed millions of bats in the East, and is the reason why the little brown myotis is endangered federally, even though at this time it is our most common bat, and there are lots of little brown myotis right now. However, yeah, declines could be up to 90% as they have been in the East once white nose syndrome hits. But we're really hoping we can mitigate that with the use of this probiotic. So we do a lot of white nose syndrome surveillance, and we also pit tag, and we have like 5 colonies that we study intensively for this project. We also are part of the Western Screech Owl Working Group, and we have installed nest boxes. So there are groups on, as I mentioned earlier, on Vancouver Island that has done a lot of this, and they've installed a lot of boxes and had success with owls occupying them, and the Fraser Valley Conservancy does a lot. And I think they've had at least one report of owls using them. Also from the ones that they've installed, but we've installed 50 nest boxes at our study sites, the places that we go often, and then we monitor those as well, and we share those data with the group. So far, we haven't had any screech owls use any of the boxes that we have installed. Have some wood ducks, and we've had some other ducks use them, bumblebees, and they're kind of a work in progress too, where they need to be repaired sometimes, especially, like when there's been really strong winds and blowdown, and other storms have affected some of our boxes. And we also were looking for a way to just retrofit them so they were easier to clean and check and maintain, without having to drag a ladder out into the field all the time. And we have a camera, so that there's a camera, an infrared camera on a pole in that photo that's going up to the nest box to look inside, and then we can take pictures, or we can take video as well. For invertebrates, we've done some monitoring pit tagging of Oregon forest snails in the Desroches area. Again, that's a turtle site that we do a lot of work at. So what we often have done is that a lot of the focus has been on multi-species at particular sites. So if we're already doing work on Western painted turtles, we try to incorporate as many species into our habitat restorations or other work as possible, just to get that multi-species approach. And we also have ongoing monitoring for Western bumblebee, and there was a iNaturalist project initiated to try to get sightings for them. And then this at-risk raptor conservation project that we've been working on the South Coast. Sunshine Coast Wildlife Project was leading it for a few years, that they just kind of wanted to step back. And so in partnership with EcoRana, we've taken on a little bit more of a lead. We coordinate with the province. There's a biologist who specifically works on goshawks and trying to establish WHAs. So we try to share information and sightings with them so that we can get habitat protected for goshawks. There's also the Pacific Megascops Research Alliance. I think you guys just had a presentation with Jeremiah, so he probably talked about that. But I'm happy to answer other questions too. So yeah, we just coordinate with them on our work that we do at particular sites, just to try to do as much as possible in different areas in the province or on the coast, at least. So we do call playback, and we also install passive acoustic monitoring or acoustic recording units to identify and assess breeding territories, focus on the upper Sunshine Coast, sea to sky, and the Northern Gulf Islands. So outreach and education. as I've already said several times, all our programs have an outreach component. For this year, we had 4 University of Fraser Valley students assisting with bat outreach in Abbotsford, which was great. Because you have to complete 4 counts. Pardon me. You have to complete 4 counts at every roost site every year, so that adds up to a lot of counts that need to be done. So, for example, for the 18 sites, you know, we have to do 72 counts. That's 72 evenings that we have to spend doing that work. 2 students from SFU and 2 from UFB, again, monitoring nesting turtles at Burnaby Lake and Nickerman Slough. We had 10 BCIT students involved in various projects. We had more than 360 people contacted through direct outreach, and as part of that sighting sign program as well. 50 people signed up for turtle monitoring training with the City of Coquitlam at the Scope NGO Fair, and 34 high school students signed up for turtle and bat monitoring at a Vancouver Sustainability Fair. We did 8 stewardship events attended with outreach materials and 15 presentations to elementary schools, and 5 presentations to naturalist groups and conservative organizations. We've also had direct participation from 4 First Nations and extensive communications with a couple others. So that's been great to have them involved in our projects. And again, that's for long-term success of any program, you know, to get as many buy-in from locals and landowners and for First Nations and other groups as possible. And yeah, partnerships with 20 local governments, agencies, park associations, conservancies, and other NGOs. And then these are also some of our major funders and partners. Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program has sponsored a lot of projects in watersheds in like the Save Watershed in Mission and Coquitlam Watershed and the Alouette Watershed. And I also worked with the Sunshine Coast Wildlife Project in the Clahome Watershed on the Sunshine Coast. And we have Wildlife Preservation Canada, who does a lot of the head starting. And as I mentioned before, Metro Vancouver Parks. Environment Canada is our major funder for our turtle project. And thankfully, we have funding for a couple more years, so we don't have to apply every year, which is nice. So we have multi-year funding for that. City of Coquitlam and other municipalities have contributed materials and staff time to some of our restorations and our monitoring. We've had HCTF funding, Parklands funding. The Greater Vancouver Zoo works with Wildlife Preservation Canada, and the Ministry of Environment head office, but then also, as I mentioned, the Ministry of Land, Water, and Resource Stewardship now is what they're called. So thank you, and any questions? I will turn on my video again.
Get her up here again for you. What do I have to do here? There we go. We've got you up there. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk there, Aimee. I found it most enlightening, and the work on the turtles is fascinating. So I'll see if there's nothing in the chat at the moment. So anybody who's joined by the link, if you want to put your questions in the chat or turn on your audio and ask the questions outright. Are there any questions here from the people in the room? Yes, Fernando. The website for the could you put in the chat box the website for reporting the turtles, or are you just doing that through iNaturalist?
Yes, just a second. I just have to close my screen share. I don't have the chat thing up here. Here we go. Yeah, like I said, we put a bunch of different options on the signage. So however people wanted to do it. Facebook Messenger seemed to be really widely used by a lot of people. But yeah, I can provide an email address also.
Well, I'll just put the chat up there. People can see that up there. And I'll write it down.
Yeah, I could also, so for Facebook, we actually have like a separate coastal painted turtle project page. Although we do have a coastal partners and conservation page as well. But we started the coastal painted turtle project page like many, many years ago. And so, yeah, we just wanted to keep it separate. Turtles often sort of dominate because that's really what we started with. And then we often, added this sort of multi-species approach as well. And then started some separate projects for different species, but.
Okay, so does that answer your question, Fernando? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Do you have a question? Any more questions here?
I see some in the chat here. You want me to answer this?
Pardon me?
I see a couple in the chat.
Oh, there's a couple in the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the chat is. Oh, I see. Here we go. Yes, can you read those, Amy? So
Sure.
The interior and coastal populations of painted turtles distinct or mixed up due to people packing them around?
Good question.
That's from Lee Larkin.
Yeah. So what happened was when we first began as well, I mean, you have the confounding issue of having red-eared sliders as well. So a lot of times people are like, these turtles aren't endangered. There's millions of them everywhere. But in the Fraser Valley, when we first started out, red-eared sliders outnumbered painted turtles 10 to 1. So most of them were sliders, not painted turtles. And then there was kind of this rumor that none of the turtles on the coast were native to the coast and that they had all been transported from the interior. So there was actually a master's student who did a genetic study. I can maybe email it the information if you want later on her name and her actual thesis. But we helped collect a bunch of the blood samples for the genetic analysis. And what they found is that there is a distinct coastal population. Actually, there were determined to be 6 genetic clusters in the province. So on the coast, it's actually, so there's a few, so there is a South Coast cluster, which the part that I found most surprising in her research was that there was actually a latitudinal separation of the genetics. So turtles on southern Vancouver Island are part of the same genetic cluster as the Lower Mainland and the Fraser Valley. So that's how long they've been separated, how long they were together before, and they've still maintained that genetic distinctness and like close to each other. And then as you go up, there's another cluster on the lower Sunshine Coast, and actually Texada Island and Port Alberni share the same genetics as well. And then Williams Lake has its own unique population of Western painted turtles. They've just been isolated from all the other populations for so long. And then there's a Kootenai population, and there is like a Thompson Okanagan population. So also those two things weren't mutually exclusive. So 100% lots of people move turtles around and take turtles, and turtles, there are definitely interior turtles that are on the coast, but those were turtles that people moved here. So both of those things happened. People did move turtles and still move turtles a lot. But there is a locally native, genetically distinct cluster on the South Coast.
All right.
Answer your question?
There's another question there. Do you
Yeah.
work with WHAs and
Yes. So
so
that's mostly relevant to northern goshawks. So that is the province's goal, is to try to establish WHAs. However, in the funding that we get, we're not supposed to be really doing that work exactly. Like, we share information and we have all these contacts locally with people, and they report observations. Sorry?
Oh, I didn't know you got to know.
They report observations to us of goshawks, and we'll follow up on them. And also within the landscape, it's a mosaic of land tenure. So we do tend to try to focus a little bit more on like the stewardship portion of it and education, and work on private land and trying to work on other ways to protect the habitat, or at least mitigate the destruction of habitat, like trying to get people to not cut down nest trees and things like that. But we share information and we work closely with the province, and they will establish WHAs, or wildlife habitat areas, for a breeding territory for goshawks. But it has to be crown land. It has to be provincial land. WHAs can only be established.
WHAs are wildlife habitat areas like the Camp River wildlife area that we work on. They're just interpreting the group.
Oh, I have a question more.
Okay.
What I found with what we're finding with WHAs is that they get established, but no one will take responsibility for them. No signage goes up, please don't enter sensitive habitat. Recreationalists are entering, no one stops them, that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if you know or could suggest what one could do. Because I have contacted the NROs and COs, species at risk biologist, and no one seems to have any funding or enough manpower to do anything.
Yeah, it's a real issue. Yeah, I mean, even for me, I mean, I have a lot of contacts within the province, and I was a biologist with the province for a couple of years, but yeah, I get told the same thing that anybody gets told, which is that you have to call RAP. Is pretty much your only option to at least document it and like take photos and have all those details. And
Yes.
basically, if you make a RAP report, they have to investigate it.
They said they were too busy.
Really?
Yes.
You filled out their
yes, I
form or
did.
whatever?
I actually spoke to someone, and I said, please have them call me and I will take them out to the site and show them the problems.
Yes.
And that was sort of the end of it. And I had talked to the COs and they had already warned me that the NROs would do nothing.
Oh,
So that's where it sits, and it's very frustrating.
I 100% agree.
Yeah, I can't
I'm
see
sorry,
why
yeah,
I
I
can't
don't
come up with a sign.
I
No.
struggle with the same, yeah, unfortunately, I have the same problems.
Right,
yeah,
right.
It's a really tough one. Like they take so long to establish these WHAs, and they have to fight with forest tenure and everything to get it done. And then it's often the bare minimum, like a lot of
Exactly.
the WHAs are actually inadequate for the full, life cycle of whatever animal it is. But yeah, it needs to be a governmental change, unfortunately. So however we can make that happen, I don't know. A regulation change, because they basically have no funding and no system set up for compliance monitoring.
Right, right.
And
Yes, I would have to sit
compliance
there.
monitoring should be being done like on a consistent basis for all of these WHAs. And
Exactly.
it's rarely done. It's only done by the impetus of one, a passionate biologist within the province. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing legal to fall back on is what the problem is.
exactly.
And so it just gets ignored, and it's like, well, why bother even establishing it? It's that window dressing thing again, you know, we're doing something, but we're not really.
Yeah, I know. I feel your pain. 100%.
Okay. Any more questions? Well, there doesn't seem to be any more questions. I had a question, but it's gone straight out of my head, so that's not unusual. I was thinking about turtles, and we were at Silver Dale wetlands. We saw turtles on the log there, but you know, as much as I always think I can tell a painted turtle from a red slider, when I look at them sitting on a log at a distance with binoculars, I still can't tell. So do you know in Silverdale wetlands if those are painted turtles, or would they be red sliders out there? Mission side, north side of the Fraser.
I can email an ID guide for the turtles too, if you like.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I
it's
meant to have a flatter shell, and you know, they're not meant to have any red on their face and so on.
got it. Yeah, so there's a few key features. So we've done a bunch of surveys. We've never seen Western painted turtles there. So we have seen sliders, but I never say never
No.
to people, because you never know. Maybe there is a painted turtle that just hasn't been seen, or sometimes somebody moved it, or it eventually, like, they will actually overland. They can overland, like, people think they're restricted to lakes or creeks or whatever it is, but they're like tanks, and they can travel like 3 kilometers overland within a decent amount of time. So I wouldn't put it past a painted turtle making it to any particular place anytime. But yeah, as far as I know, they're just sliders. And yeah, the keys are their shell shape, as you said. So like painted turtles are a lot flatter and smoother, usually. Like often if it's a sunny day or whatever, like a painted turtle's shell is often a little more glossy. And a slider shell is often a little rougher. And it's quite domed.
Yeah.
And you can often, even like in a silhouette, you can often like, even if they're not super close, you can tell their head shape as well. Like sliders have this big triangular head, and you can like really see the difference between their neck and their head. But Western painted turtles have a much sleeker, like almost like a snake, like a head to their neck. And so yeah, it's not quite as a distinct head. And even though it depends on how far away it is, but even though you can't actually see the direct underneath of them, you can usually see the shell like right by their neck or their head, like this part of their body or the side of their body. So if that's red, then it's a Western painted turtle. If it's yellow, then it's a slider.
Okay, so
Also, you
red
can
around the base of the shell there, that's probably a red slider. I don't remember, Lana, with those ones out at Silverdale, were they? Do you remember? I just remember taking a picture of them, and you know, I looked at them and I thought they were red sliders. When I saw them, I thought the shell was too domed. But I live out in Harrison, and in the Miami River, there is the oldest, most beat up looking turtle that I see every so often in there. And again, I think that's a red slider. I think he's been living in that river for about 30 years. And
yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, somebody released them probably.
And he's on his own.
They were young.
He's a beat up looking guy. He's still
Yeah, I don't like to put too much emphasis on the red stripe on their head.
No.
Because often as the sliders age, that fades, so you won't really see it. And there's also other slider species out there that don't have a red stripe. So you have like yellow-bellied sliders, and you have like other cooter species, river cooter species that look very similar, but they don't have a red stripe. So yeah.
Well, I guess people have let them go. I know at the Salish, at the library here at Salish Pond, I think they call it. That used to be full of red slider turtles. I don't know if it's still, anybody know if it's still all full of turtles there? Or
Some of them have died out.
Oh, maybe. At Sardis Pond, where all the geese are? Okay, so they're saying there's red sliders that are at Sardis Pond in,
There are some painted turtles there too, actually.
Wonder? Oh.
Yeah.
And the great blue heron, I think they're trying to get painted turtles to nest there. I thought they had a nesting site there for painted turtles.
At Sardis?
But the great blue heron nature
Oh,
reserve.
Great Blue Heron Reserve. Yeah, the Great Blue Heron Reserve is a challenging area.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple turtles, Western painted turtles, observed there in our surveys too, and that was one site that was known. And a nesting beach was installed like more than 10 years ago,
Mhm.
but it wasn't maintained. Like we had an agreement that it would be maintained by volunteers, etc., but it never really worked out, and it just kind of faded a little bit. It kind of faded a bit in our priorities as well, so we let them know that too. Like
Mhm.
initially, that was one of the sites that was one of the few sites we had, and so we were focusing on it. But in the end, it ended up that at least one of the turtles wasn't even a Western, fully a Western painted turtle, so they probably was somebody's pet.
Mm.
That they released at some point, because there's other subspecies of painted turtle, like there's the southern painted turtle and the eastern painted turtle and the midland painted turtle. And also the contamination at that site really started to become a concern for us. There's creosote contamination because it's an old D&D
Yeah.
property.
Okay.
And after doing our assessments, it quickly became clear that it would cost probably now billions, at least millions, to restore that habitat. There was just a lot of concerns with young turtles, like if we were going to try to augment there, and also the substrate and having eggs develop where there's some contamination, that it could have an effect on reproductive development, like development of the reproductive systems and everything. So it's really unfortunate because it's a beautiful site and it did have a lot of potential, but that side of it really kind of dropped it down in our priorities. We have other sites that are more ideal, I guess.
Alder Grove Regional Park, we were there in September, I believe, and I think we saw painted turtle nesting sites there that were marked with signs. That could have been your group. I'm not
Sorry,
sure.
what site?
At Alder Grove, didn't you see
Yes.
signs there about painted turtles?
Yeah, so Alder Grove was one of the ones where we had nesting confirmed for the first time from Head Starts last year. So that was really exciting. Alder Grove and Minnetonka.
Oh, all right, so we
Yeah.
were at Alder Grove earlier this year, so I thought I'd seen something. I have been looking at that area for about 7 years, and I have found that the nesting, they have cancer, they grow. It's amazing. I have come up to 14 on the person. No. Jefferson Road in Chilliwack. Rosedale. So did you hear that, Amy? I have sent the coordinator in Facebook about 5 years ago. I sent the coordinator to, I don't remember her name. Kim.
Wellstead.
Sorry? Wellstead. Yeah. I Kim, so she. And pictures. I can send you picture. I have. Okay, so I don't know the size according to what age they are. Okay. But I have seen it from the one that you show, the size that you show me the picture. Mm-hmm. The bigger one, actually the owl. And they are on the, I have seen them in the ground walking, that you said they can really walk. Okay, can you hear all of that, Amy? So
Just little bits.
yeah, one of our members is saying that Jefferson Road, which is out on the south side of the Fraser opposite Rosedale, that she some years ago took pictures of nesting turtles there, and you believe them to be the painted turtles? Oh, they are painted turtles, and she did send the coordinates to Kim Wellstead, I guess, in the ministry.
Okay.
So that's Oh, we'll send it to her Facebook. So you would still have those pictures, Paulina? So Paulina could probably share those pictures with you if you're
Sure,
interested.
yeah, if you can, and describe the location or whatever,
Yeah, so we've got,
send photos, that'd be great. Yeah, I mean, Kim, yeah, we work closely with Kim, and she actually she often responds and posts things on the Coastal Painted Turtle
yeah.
Project Facebook too, so she's kind of part of that a little bit.
So that's just maybe another area that you're not, maybe don't have in your database that Paulina knows
Yeah,
about.
sure, that'd be great. Yeah, we'll follow up on that for sure.
But now you see nothing? Oh, it's still good. So if you, so in 2022, you've seen turtles there. Okay, so that's what she's saying. So Paulina is a photographer, and her and Fernando are out all the time. So yeah, we'll
Awesome.
make sure that information gets to
Yeah,
you.
any sightings, observations? Awesome, great, fabulous.
Oh, okay, what's your question? Yeah, she said, could you talk about cross breeding between species yeah, species of turtles? Is that happening? Is there a problem with that?
Not sliders, because they're a different genus. But the other subspecies of painted turtle. So there were some hybrid turtles in Burnaby Lake. We're not really sure. They've kind of traced it back from anecdotal reports of somebody or some whatever, or like a massive release of midland painted turtles that were either people's pets. I mean, there's also gone through like, you know, people have pet turtles, and then there's like a salmonella scare, and then like, you know, all these turtles get released. Like that happened a lot in the 50s and the 60s, so I hear.
Mhm.
So yeah, so there was an issue with that. So we have opportunistically removed some of those hybrids, and they, you know, sometimes they will go to zoos or facilities elsewhere. I mean, they do naturally interbreed in the east, where their habitat or their ranges overlap. So there are natural intergrades of those different painted turtle subspecies, but in BC, yeah, Western painted turtles are our only native turtle. So
basically, there's no interbreeding here unless somebody.
not natural. Yeah,
Happened in Burnaby.
people's pet painted turtle that they released. Yeah.
We had a lady come and talk to a field camp we had once, and she brought live turtles that were some kind of an intergrade. I don't know if that was you, like my memory is not always that sharp, but somebody came out and spoke to a field camp in 2015 or something like that, in November, and we had her as a speaker, and she had live turtles with her, which were no-nos. They were interbred, but she looked after them.
Okay. Yeah, that might have been Andrea Gielan's at the zoo, Wildlife Preservation Canada.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's like, so they have taken in some of those intergrades for outreach purposes, right? So yeah.
People are attracted to them, like, you know,
Yeah.
oh wow, something live, and they want to see them. Okay. Are there any further questions? Well, Amy, thank you so very, very much. If you could send me your mailing address, please, on the email. You sent me emails the other day. I guess it says Jan Perrin on there. Maybe not. Probably called me DC Nature. Oh, yes, it does. Anyway, I'm Jan Perrin. You could send me your mailing address if you'd like to send you a check for your work this evening. And you know, we're very, very pleased that you appeared, and glad we could set it up at the last minute with our Zoom link. And I had a meeting all sitting there ready to go, so I didn't even have to scramble to see if I could get a space on the Zoom site.
Perfect.
So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much to Lee and Dennis and Scott for joining us on the internet. And I'll turn off the recording now if I can possibly find where that is. Right beside the green thing. It says reactions. I don't know where it says recording anyway. Let me, here we go. I can stop it here. Now it's hidden over here. You see, they hide things here. All right. So now